Hello and welcome to the Big H Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Heise, and today I've got Jim Smith, longtime resident of the village of Hilton. Jim, it is great to have you with us.
We live in the town of Parma, not the village of Hilton.
All righty, and I know the difference. I would like to start off with what's a day in the life of you right now?
Typically, I live on one of the family farms, do a lot of outdoor activities. If in the right season, gardening, some of the rest of the time, chopping and stacking wood, and or we're traveling.
Oh, very nice. What's the last place you traveled to?
We just came back from a trip from Nashville and Memphis.
Oh, sweet. Were you visiting friends, or was it just...
That part was vacation, and then on the way back, we stopped in Virginia where our other son lives.
Okay. All right. Well, very good.
Another grandson.
Well, let's go back a little bit about your family, your parents, where you grew up, that type of thing.
Well, when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm on Bennett Road, which borders the north end of the high school, and lived there until I went off to college and got a job. And a few years later, I came back and bought the other family homestead, and that's where I've been living for almost 45 years.
Good long time. And your parents, what were their names?
My father was Fay William, Fahy, and my mother was Lois Burdett.
And were they farmers, or what did they do for occupations?
Well, obviously, my father grew up he was literally born in the house I live in. So he grew up there, went off to Alfred and got a degree in glass technology, and then worked for Bausch and Lomb during World War II in their defense business. And shortly thereafter, he and my grandfather had already gone into the milk business. And in 1946, my father became a full-time milkman. And we did everything. We raised the cows, milked the cows, bottled the milk, and delivered it to your door.
Oh, very nice.
And my mother is from an old family in the southern tier. Though they really weren't that close during college, they were both at Alfred at the same time. She had a unique career at Sibley's before the war, and then joined the Red Cross, and was one of the first females with the U.S. To get into Europe during World War II.
Wow.
And she was there until late 1946 because of the transportation of the day. A lot of boys didn't come home. For several years, they were convalescing in Europe. And then she came home and was inspired what she saw and went and got her master's degree in occupational therapy. And then friends from college put them together, and they got married and came out to Parma and raised a family.
Do you have any siblings?
I had three brothers. I have one brother still with us. He actually lives in the Bennett Road farm. And then I have sisters that were twins.
Okay. And were they identical or fraternal?
Very much fraternal. Very much.
I only ask because I'm a fraternal twin myself. Yeah. So a lot of farm life within your family.
Yes. Both on my grandmother's side, Richard Sands came to the town of Parma in 1822. At some point, don't know exact timeline, he purchased the farm where I live now and built a house that I live in. And then my grandfather, Stanley Smith, his family was here very, very early. I don't know the exact date, but his great grandfather, John Smith, who was born in 1797, built a house at the very west end of Parma on Curtis Road. And certainly in the beginning, it was all farming. I think my father was one of the first that went and got a college education, but then came back to farming. But most everybody was a farmer at some point. My grandmother's brothers, who were significantly older than her, they ended up, just because the farm wasn't big enough, they ended up working in the salt mines down in the Watkins Glen area, because there was like a 16-year difference. So they were almost grown and out of the house before my grandmother was born.
You said you had two brothers. No, a brother.
And my two older brothers have since passed.
Okay. And what did they do? Were they farmers or?
Well, unfortunately, my one brother died just before his 21st birthday. He was working for Rochester Products while he was finishing up night school for his college degree. And then my older brother, he had a college degree and worked in a variety of industries. And then at some juncture, he got into farming and then went back to work in industry, because sometimes farming is a pretty tough business financially.
Sure. You were saying that you raised cows and did the whole process from milking to delivering. What was that like?
Well, we had what they call a herdsman, who took care of the day-to-day responsibilities of feeding the cows, milking the cows, whatnot. And then literally across my driveway, they would carry what they call 40-quart cans of milk over. And then we had a processing plant where it was filtered and pasteurized and chilled and put into glass bottles. And, you had a walk-in cooler and built into inventory, and then you deliver it. So we actually had a gentleman that ran the bottling plant for many years, who lived across the street. And then my father did it. My brother did it. We were out of that part of the business before I was of age to bottle milk. But I did deliver my first quart of milk when I was 7. So, and then, so we bottled milk and we delivered the milk, and we had one full-time driver and my father. So we had 3, when I was young, we had 3 routes. And as more and more people went to the supermarket, the routes got a little leaner and leaner, and they were consolidated into 2 units. And we went from 3 3-day deliveries a week to 2 2-day deliveries a week, just because that was as the market shrank. We did that.
At your peak time, how many dairy cows did your farm have?
Probably maybe 40, 45. In those days, it was almost pretty big doings. There was one person over in Hamlin that had maybe 170 cows that they milked. But it's nothing like the factory farms of today. And we would go and pick up milk from other people that had very small herds, 10, 12 cows, and we would pick up from like 3 other farmers and then bring all of that milk back and bottle it.
Yeah, and forgive me for the ignorant question. Did you have machines that would milk the cows, or?
Well, we had machines in that a small stainless steel container with literally 4 suction cups, for lack of a better word, was attached to an individual cow, and that milk went into the stainless steel bucket was driven by a vacuum system.
Okay.
And then that milk was dumped into the 40-quart milk can. So each cow was milked basically individually.
Mm-hmm.
And but that was probably state of the art,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm talking about, probably late 40s and then, in early 50s. It was probably state of the art. And then obviously the bigger milk modeling plants kind of put the little guys out of business.
Right. What type of acreage did your farmland own?
The farm I grew up on, Bennett Road, was pretty much still intact. It was probably 80 acres because my brother lives there. And then at peak, probably my farm was a little over 100 acres. Now
Okay.
it's about 90
Okay.
because they sold 5 acres to the eldest boy, and city folk wanted a bigger backyard, so we sold some land off.
Right. Right. Getting it back to your education, did you grow up in the village and go through K through 6 education there? Or
I went through K through 12 at Hilton Central.
Okay.
So I did Hazel Jenkins for a couple of years. Went to Jonathan Underwood when it was brand new. Went to Merton Williams when it was brand new, and then finished up at what's now the Quest School, the original high school on West Avenue.
Mm-hmm. And what year did you graduate from?
1971.
1971. What was the time period like at that point in the village of Hilton, or just life in general? Like,
well, I think it was, I call it calm. I think it was pretty calm. We were becoming more and more a bedroom community, with people working at Kodak and Xerox and Bausch and Lomb. There was still a fair number of farmers with small acreage. Now the few farmers that are left are much larger acres, or they rent the land.
mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I guess, it was a good place to grow up, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of controversy.
Mm-hmm. Were you involved in any clubs or any activities, or what was going on?
Well, in school, I was, interestingly enough, involved in a rifle club, something that people would go probably bonkers to know that there was guns on school property. And I was on a wrestling team, and was fairly active in the Baptist church, in through my teens.
Mm-hmm.
Probably some other clubs that I can't think of right now.
Yeah, I talked to Ken Freeman on another podcast, and he had brought up the rifle club too.
Yeah.
The wrestling team. Do you remember who your coach was back then?
Al Kratz.
Al Kratz. Okay, know him well. He was there when I was going through in the mid to late 80s. And then you also said you were active in your Baptist church?
Yeah, not super active, but, we had a youth group, and, that's where probably Nancy and I became friends, because we were both fairly active in the church at that particular point.
And besides the couple clubs you mentioned, were there any courses or classes work that you started solidifying, this could be my interest for my life?
Well, was thinking about being a lawyer, and then I took Latin, and that changed my attitude a lot. And then I became very interested in the environment, and started working towards a degree. It didn't come out exactly as an environmental degree, but after 2 years at MCC, I went to the University of Buffalo and got a civil engineering degree. And moved back home for a little while, sold pneumatic and hydraulic equipment, and then got a job, and I spent a little over 2 years in Erie, Pennsylvania, in the industrial water treatment business. And then I had an opportunity to move back to Parma, buy the farm, and change companies, but the same field. and I worked for that company for 31 years and retired. And then other people hired me to work part time, and I set up my own little consulting company and did that, and was involved in Parma Town Hall, and retired from everything about 6 years ago.
Okay. So, and when did you meet your wife? You met her in high school then?
No, I met her while I was going to college. Turns out that we both ended up working for the fast food chain called Carol's. We met, but I was at MCC and was going on to University of Buffalo, so we drifted apart for a number of years, and then that gal that actually stood up for us at our wedding put us back together. So I've known her a long time.
And she graduated the same year from school, from Hilton?
No, she was a city girl.
Okay.
She graduated. So that school doesn't exist anymore, but she graduated from Nazareth High School.
Okay. Yep. Now you said you ended up being a civil engineer. Can you describe to me a little bit about what a civil engineering is?
Well, not that I did a lot of it, but a true civil engineer does a lot of work with infrastructure, whether it's building bridges, building buildings, building water treatment plants, which was sort of what attracted me to it. So I sort of was in the water side, not building buildings or building roads. But a lot of math, a lot of things went like that into the business. There was some basic chemistry for water treatment that I studied in college, and then I went on to use a lot of that in my professional life.
And what was the UB like when you were going through? Good memories of that place?
Oh, excellent memories of that place. Sort of got there as the activists of the Vietnam era was really dying down. So it was, from that kind of standpoint, it was relatively calm and quiet. I was very active in college and had a great time.
That's what college is for. Now, you said you were active or involved in the Parma Town Hall?
Yes.
Describe that a little bit.
Well, again, back to sort of my interest in the environment. In the very, very early stages of recycling, there were no programs. So I ended up being the head of the Parma Recycling Committee, and we really tried to come up with ways to encourage people to recycle their oil, their newspapers, magazines, other things, and try to come up with collection points, because it was, if you didn't do it, it didn't get done, because it wasn't a blue box at the side of the road. It was, you had to physically take it someplace. And then sort of based on that, I got sort of people in the town government interested in what I had to bring. And so I served on the Parma Planning Board for 12 years. And basically the planning board looks at the plans for development, whether it's a single home or a development. We would look at the plans, not so much the interior of the house, but what was that development going to do to the land in the area? Was it going to have a negative or positive impact on the neighbors as far as drainage and things like that? And then after 12 years of that, I ran for the Parma Town Board, and initially was on the town board for 8 years. And then I ran for supervisor, was supervisor for 4 years. So I was technically a member of the Parma Town Board for 12 years.
And if I go back to when you were in charge of the Parma Recycling Commission.
Yes.
What was that like, trying to bring people along and getting them to buy into what you were thinking?
there were people that were very interested and very happy to do whatever they could.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were the people that just didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
And some you could win over and some you couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But it was as much as trying to make it as easy and convenient as possible. Mm-hmm. And, because that was still in a day where a lot of people changed their own oil.
Mm-hmm.
And, we had developed a couple of collection sites. Some of it was just, a garage. It would, take the oil back and recycle it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the paper products that we buy today, or even then, were made from recycled paper.
Mm-hmm.
So that would reduce the number of trees that had to come down to make paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then glass at that point was fairly easy because we had Owens, Illinois, out in Brockport,
right.
a glass plant. So
right.
that's where we would get glass together and take it over there, and they would make more glass out of it.
Mm-hmm. So you were really involved in, I guess, the planning board. It's considered government, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
And 12 years on the Parma planning board. For 12 years of your life, that's a long time. So you must have enjoyed it, right?
Yes. It was nice to be involved. It was nice to know what was going on. And, at that point, Parma was growing with a lot of new homes and developments. And one of the things that got me interested in the planning board was some of the developments were taking prime farmland
mm-hmm.
out of production.
Mm-hmm.
And legally, you can't do anything really to stop it. But the idea was, let's, do as little harm as we can
mm-hmm.
To the environment. And stack the original development that got me going is still farmland.
Mm-hmm.
And then other, areas, have got housing developments.
Mm-hmm. Seems like we're continuing to grow.
Yeah, it sort of amazes me, not just in Parma, but around Monroe County, is that supposedly the county's population growth is relatively flat.
Mm-hmm.
So who's buying all these houses?
Right.
And I don't know that.
Right.
Obviously, somebody's buying them because they're building them.
Exactly. And then you mentioned that you were on the town board for 8 years. What led you to be on the town board, and like maybe the differences between being on a planning board versus the town board?
Well, the planning board focus was fairly narrow.
Right.
The town board really covered almost everything going on in the town of Parma that wasn't the village of Hilton, because they have their own separate governmental entity. And there was a little bit of county infrastructure, because about a third of the roads in the town of Parma are state-owned, but a third are owned by Monroe County, and about a third is owned by the town of Parma.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Parma maintains those roads, whether it's fixing them or plowing the snow. Interesting, the county hires the town of Parma to do odd jobs and plow the snow on the county roads. The state has its own interesting model. 259, which you live on, is a state road, and the town of Parma is hired by the state of New York to plow that.
Mm-hmm.
But they won't hire us to do maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side, the New York State Parkway is maintained completely, snow removal, whatever, by state employees. So there's a lot of interaction that way. We have a huge recreation department.
Mm-hmm.
The town board is responsible for selecting members of the planning board, the zoning board, the recreation commission, the library board. Kind of all of those things fall under the purview of the town board. Obviously, we have to develop a budget.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have to raise taxes. Sometimes we don't. But we have to present a budget to the town. First, we approve it as a town board, and then we present it to the town. We give them an opportunity for a budget hearing. Obviously, controversy brings a lot of people to town board meetings, and lack of controversy means there's nobody there.
Right.
So we do that. And I really, other than, the times where you had irate citizens or irate employees, it was very enjoyable. And I enjoyed it. I used to take on projects and going back to my environmental and energy background from work. I got a grant to replace the boiler at Town Hall from something that was to replace something that was very, very inefficient. Upgraded the air conditioning system and saved the town a fair amount of money in energy, and was able to get grants from the state of New York, which helped cover that big upfront cost. So,
yeah, that was going to be my next question, was like, what are some of your key accomplishments that you felt you did as a member of the town board?
Yeah, probably projects related to saving energy, protecting the environment, trying to come up with ways to get things fixed that were cost effective. Interestingly enough, the state wants competitive wage rates, and there's times you can get the job done with local contractors at a significantly better value, but the prevailing wage rate sometimes by the state kind of prevented you from doing that, which I thought was a little crazy. But I think those were the big things. We had really never had a formal process for employee evaluations, and tried to get that going so that people knew what was expected of them, and you could evaluate them and kind of learn from them. And because there was a lot of different departments, and it was a way of kind of learning what's going on, because we had a building department, we have dog control, we have an assessor's office, we have a town clerk's office, obviously we have a financial office. We did a couple of upgrades because we also have a court that takes care of anywhere from minor infractions to the deputies will arrest somebody for a crime and bring them into town hall, and one of the two town judges would arraign them and determine if they were being remanded to custody, given an appearance ticket or whatever. And then depending on the severity of the charges, they could be tried in the town Parma, but a more serious crime, the county would take over.
Okay. And then you served as supervisor for 4 years. Is that the one term? Is that one term?
No, it's 2 years.
Okay. And then what brought you to the point where I think I want to take on a supervisor job?
Much of it was driven by a political need, because we had some warring factions within town government, and a number of people thought that I would be a good calming influence, and so I ran. I told them I would do 2-year terms, but I had said I would only run for town board for 10 years, and I ended up going an extra 2.
And what was your tenure like as town supervisor?
for the most part, I thought it was very, very good. It's interesting, some of the problems the citizens come to you with. The more amazing one is the people that couldn't get along with their neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
and they thought as supervisor I could fix that. And it doesn't work that way.
Right.
But again, it was, there was a lot of different agencies you had to work with that were outside of town. So, I would go to meetings, whether it was with the county, the state, to try to, work out different things, try to get, sometimes it's try to get grant money. Sometimes it was try to convince the state to be a little more efficient, because why bring a crew out from, I think, their main facilities up on, Jefferson Road
Mm-hmm.
in the city, well, actually Henrietta. Why bring them out for a minor road repair
Mm-hmm.
when the town of Parma's highway department could do that work
Mm-hmm.
and, probably charge the state less money than they were going to shell out.
Right.
And they were very protective because they felt their guys needed the work in the summer. And so, but I mean, I went literally to Albany once to kind of fight that battle, and
Mm-hmm.
I did not win.
Hey, you got to try.
Yeah, got to try.
So, growing up, maybe your high school, slightly out of high school, what were some of those early jobs you had, or were you pretty much tied to dad and grandpa on the farm?
Probably worked on the farm one way or another, up through literally, part-time as it would have been up through college graduation.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly I was in the part of the business that delivered milk.
Mm-hmm.
I had bad allergies in those days, so up close and personal with the cows was really something that didn't go well.
Right.
So I mostly worked on the dairy side of the business. And then, for part-time, I worked, then it was called the Big M, but I worked
Mm-hmm.
in the grocery store. And then in college, I worked for the Carrolls, which is where I met my wife to be. And worked at some other, worked at a deli in Spencerport. And then kind of worked my way through college with
Mm-hmm.
different odd jobs.
Mm-hmm. And so your wife's name is Nancy, correct?
No, my wife's name is Jeanette.
My bad. I'm sorry.
When I said Nancy, I was talking about Nancy that got me here.
Gotcha. So Nancy Laporte?
Yes.
Okay. Know her well. Where was I going with that? Your personal family, your own children. How many children do you have?
3 boys. 2 live locally, one very locally. One lives in Virginia, and I have 5 grandkids.
So the 2 that are locally, you said one is like
I can see his house
you can
from
see
my backyard, my deck. He built a log house on what was part of the farm, and he has 2 little kids. And then the youngest brother youngest boy is out in Webster,
Mm-hmm.
and he has 2 kids.
Okay.
And then the middle brother is in Virginia.
Very good. Now, Nancy, when she got you in touch with me, you had said that your family is one of the earliest settlers of Parma. I'm going to kind of leave it open to you as to, what do you recall about your family tree and landmarks around Hilton that are in the Smith clan?
Well, my great-great-grandfather, Richard Sands, moved to Parma, I think I mentioned in 1822, eventually purchased the farm I live on, built the house I live in, and I think in those days, pretty much a jack of all trades.
Mm-hmm.
There was parts of the farm that had different orchards on them. Obviously, we raised cows for milk, cattle for meat and slaughter. We had, they had hogs and chickens. A lot of that was gone, before I had much of any recollection.
Mm-hmm.
And then John Smith, who is the first Smith that I can track into the town of Parma, was sort of on the westmost border of Parma, and I think even had agricultural interests in Hamlin in there. And then, to the best of my knowledge, everybody was really pretty much into, at least, the direct, my direct ancestors were pretty much tied to agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Isn't there a Smith cemetery in the area?
There is a Smith cemetery. Where is it? Well, there's a Smith cemetery in another name that's down at the intersection of North Avenue and Dunbar Road.
Mm-hmm.
That one's, and I don't know how many, I have very few ancestors buried there. A lot of my Sand side of the family, my father's side of the family, is at Parma Union Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of my grandfather's, Stanley Smith, his ancestors were mostly buried in Hamlin, because there was a fair, there was a disconnect. I don't know if disconnect is the right word. A
Mm-hmm.
connection with Hamlin. A lot of the Smith wives came from people that lived in Hamlin. So
Mm-hmm.
we had a number of people that, if I go another generation back, were Hamlin.
Mm-hmm.
And though I don't know that they were related, because I haven't done as much cross-checking, but on two different sides of the family, the maiden names of women were Curtis.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Curtis Road.
Curtis Road, yep.
And there were a lot of Curtises in the area at that time, and I don't know really which ones I was related to.
Mm-hmm.
But we had John Smith, Mercelan, Andrew, Stanley, my grandfather, and Fay, my father. So there was, before you even got to me, there was 5 generations of Parma men.
I know. I was looking in Leah Wright's book and in the index, and Smith is about this long.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, I'm going to let Jim handle all that.
Well, and interestingly enough, my grandparents, which were Smiths by marriage, they had 2 kids, my father and my aunt. So again, a small family. My mother's parents were the same way. She had 1 brother, and then my grandmother grew up in a house with 6. And then some of the other families were 2 and 3 members.
Mm-hmm.
So we never had the huge footprint that some of the other families
Mm-hmm.
I know, where they'd have 10 or 12 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't, there's not a lot of Smiths. I mean, right now, the only Smith related to me that I know of is my brother over in Bennett Road.
Right.
People laughed at my graduating class at 71. I think they paraded 13 Smiths up to the podium, and 2 girls were related. That was it.
That's amazing. I mean, that's amazing.
And so he goes, and people were giggling, another Smith. And
Right.
I said, I said, we aren't related.
Right.
So, and there's no Sands around,
Mm-hmm.
So when my grandma, when her siblings moved away, they didn't come back. And obviously my grandmother's changed her name to Smith.
Mm-hmm.
So the Sands family had a long run, and then it stopped.
Mm-hmm. Any of your family descendants war veterans?
Well, I had trying to think on my father's side. I'm not so sure. On my mother's side, we had people fight in the French and Indian War, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I think the Spanish-American War. I think my mother was the only one that served in World War II. My aunt, my father's sister, her husband served over in Europe during World War II. But we kind of got covered in a lot of the very, very early battles, like I said, starting with the French and Indian War. I had he was a young man, or actually probably more a boy, down where my mother is from in the southern tier. He went out one day and disappeared. And they went out looking for, his body. And 7 years later, he showed up knocking at the door.
Oh, my.
Native Americans had taken him prisoner because by the French, because the English were paying for scalps.
Okay.
And he was too young, so he didn't count.
Wow.
So he survived, the French and Indian War, and was, I guess the word is repatriated. I think he was in Montreal, where he was being held. And then got released and found his way back home.
Must be something. You think you've lost a member of your family, and 7 years later, wow,
here he is. And he looked more Indian than the rest of his family. But it was just sort of a very interesting little side saga.
Are there any streets or historical markers named after your family in Parma?
Not that I'm aware of, because I don't believe Smith Street in the village would have been named after my family, because we were, outside of the village. It'd probably be a stretch to say, one of my ancestors was how Curtis Road got its name.
Right.
It's possible, but
right.
But I'm not aware of any. Actually, I've tried to promote getting my great grandfather recognized by a street name someday, but it hasn't worked out so well.
And that great grandfather's name was
Richard Sands.
Richard Sands. Okay.
Yes.
Now, you said you retired officially 6 years ago, was it?
Yes.
And how you been keeping yourself busy?
Either around the farm or traveling. We've made trips to Europe and Africa.
Wow.
And we've got a couple more trips planned. We've got good friends that travel everywhere, and they try to drag us along. We go to about every other trip with them. So yeah, we do travel, and then we have a camper, and we've been to Texas with the camper. We've been to Florida. Hopefully, Memorial Day weekend, we head for a month-long trip that'll get us out to Mount Rushmore and back with the camper, and then hopefully we're going to the Grand Canyon in the fall.
Oh, exciting.
And then in between that, the family has had a place up in the St. Lawrence River for many, many, many years, and I try to get up there whenever I can.
But you always come back to your roots in Hilton. You have no desire to relocate or anything like that?
No, I don't really have. I mean, to maybe go someplace in the winter more extensively, but we're not Florida people. We proved that sort of ourselves. We stayed outside of Tampa for a month in our camper. And it just didn't excite us, the traffic and whatnot. We're looking at maybe doing some camping in Georgia and Alabama next 2025 winter, I think. And whether or not that would get us, but right now, 4 out of 5 grandkids are in very close driving proximity, and we're very, very close with them. So even going away for a month, my wife gets an itch. So us going to someplace for even a few months, I don't think we would do it. But I like good old Parma Hilton.
Me too. Now you said a lot of your career or interest was around environmental. How do you think Parma Hilton is doing now with energy and energy savings and efficiency and all that? I mean, this is more of an opinion question, I guess, but it seems like you're very knowledgeable about it.
Well, we certainly have seen more solar development in the town. I tried to do a project on some what I will call wasteland, but there was some concerns about liability of taking over the responsibility for that kind of property. So the town didn't uh, build a solar farm there, and then I was going to build one at the back corner of the town park, and it turns out the closest utility lines weren't rated for a solar farm. So that to upgrade them would have been on Parma's budget, and I said that's not going to work. We try to do things to keep waste out of our water streams. Where there's might be a storm sewer or something. Some of them we've literally marked. Don't dump oil. It's amazing what people will do to get rid of their waste motor oil. Even though garages and quick lube places, they're legally obligated to take it. People will still do dumb stuff. So we try to make that as inconvenient as possible, if you will, to do that. But we really, only have a little industry. What would have been the big industry from an environmental standpoint was when we did have dairy farms. Even a small farm could generate a lot of waste. And, I felt we managed it in an environmentally friendly way because we had sort of that balance of acreage and herd size where the manure could be spread safely, on, the farm property. The bigger factory farms, the ones that have 2,000 head, that's a huge environmental issue. And we don't have to deal with. Our last couple of large dairy farms have since closed. And we did have one that was a bit of a challenge, and that probably did slow down the retirement of the last generation, and going from there. And so I don't know that we've had, like I said, other than some drainage issues and things like that, we haven't had huge environmental issues that we've had to deal with.
You stayed around here your whole life. What does Hilton offer today, do you think? If we got the people come in for a carnival, let's say, what would you tell that person? Like, this is what this village and town provide.
Well, I still think it's, even as crazy as the world is, it's a pretty safe place to live. I mean, it's only been a few years that we've really routinely started locking our doors at night. The rest of the day, our house is wide open. People just walk in. So I think it's a pretty safe place. You can, take your kids to the park, kind of let them run somewhat free. And a lot of activities, whether it's village managed or Parma Recreation is sort of one of the areas where we're very much collaborative. Most of the village recreation activities are actually managed by the town of Parma. So the community center, which is at Henry Street, that was a brand new school that my father went to. It's owned by the village, but Parma rents space there for our recreational activities. So there's a joint recreation committee, 4 members of the village, 4 members of the town, so that we can, collaborate on that. I mean, they have a very active food shelf that is for Parma and Hilton residents. I think the school system is really good. I think it served me well. Um, and I think I think it had a little dip a couple of decades ago, and I think they've rebounded nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think you could bring your kids here and be happy here.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you like driving around, and it's less and less open space, but there's
Right.
still a lot of open space.
Right.
And, again, part of the town board philosophy is to try to manage that. If we're going to have a development, let's try to get it together and not hodgepodge here, hodgepodge there.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to, where practical, minimize, some of the infrastructure that would attract, developments.
Mm-hmm.
So, because a lot of people say they come to town of Parma for the rural atmosphere. And when somebody builds a house in their backyard, they get all upset. It says you should have bought the land.
Right.
Nobody liked that answer.
Right.
Nobody liked that answer. You don't want anybody in your backyard? Buy it.
Right. What do you think is going to be your family's legacy?
Well, I'd like to think we were and will continue to be good stewards of the land.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that a generation from now, 2 generations from now, my farm will still be farmed. Hopefully where my brother lives, it'll still be farmed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that might be, the biggest legacy. Hopefully I get a little chunk for trying to serve the community in a broad sense. But I think promoting open space would be the biggest legacy.
Very noble. Very noble. You kind of already answered. I was going to ask you 3 words to describe Hilton, and you said safe, schools. Anything else you think on that?
I'd say calm.
Right.
It doesn't get too exciting around here, except maybe Carnival Week.
And then these are just, as we start to wrap up, some fun things that, I don't know, maybe people don't know. I don't know. Do you have a favorite book of all time?
Oh, favorite book.
Maybe
probably one I read a long, long time ago, which was Exodus, written by Leon Uris, and it was really about the formation of this state of Israel.
No kidding.
And all of the trials and tribulations they went through, from literally getting from Europe to Israel, because there was literally pioneers that went in and started living there, and they actually cohabitated very well with their Muslim brothers. It really wasn't until I think even in 1947, when the state of Israel was created, a lot of outside people got their 2 cents in, and led to the ongoing conflict that has sort of festered for 75 years. But that was a great book.
Any favorite movie?
Oh, it's just chintzy, but I'd say Star Wars.
That's all right. All of them, or just?
Well, the original, you always get props to the original,
right?
But I think they've all been great.
Okay.
They've all been great.
Right. Favorite quote, most meaningful.
I read that, and I don't know. I mean, probably. JFK's asked not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country? Because that's, in some way, that's how I've tried to conduct my life a little bit anyway.
And I think when you said to be good stewards of the land, I think that, favorite TV show, if you have one.
There's so many. I watch way too much TV. Probably Blue Bloods on Friday night at CBS.
Tom Selleck?
Yeah.
Got a favorite food?
Wow. Probably a good steak.
Good steak.
Yeah, good steak I can grill outside.
Sounds
And this is the
good.
winter because I love to grill.
Uh-huh. And another quick question: favorite leisure activity? I don't know. You sounds like you do a lot of traveling, but is there something else you like to do to kick back and just relax?
Well, I like to garden. The problem is my eyes are bigger than my brain, so I make too big a garden because I don't have time with all our travels to keep it weeded properly. But I like to garden. I got a granddaughter that likes to help me, and we'll can pickles and freeze some vegetables if we can get a good harvest. Last year was a weird year. Right now, I'm a little worried that I won't be able to plant because it's so wet out. But I like gardening. I've got a wood lot I like to go down and tinker in. Right now, I'm getting a boat ready to take up to camp. So like a little mechanical stuff, but probably gardening and travel.
Sounds good. What do you want to be in 5 years? You had lived an accomplished life and you're retired.
I'd still like to be healthy enough to work on the farm and travel.
Okay.
But it gets to be harder and harder, that's for sure.
Right. Where do you think Hilton's going to be in 5 years?
I'd like to think it's going to be kind of where it's at. I mean, there are a couple of large developments, on the books for housing. I don't know how many more solar farms. I guess because it saved the political war. We're interestingly enough, we're not in a prime location to put in a windmill farm, so we're probably never going to fight that battle. I could see maybe some more solar farms, but it's probably the biggest driver will be the politics really around maybe the school and where the school is or isn't. Because it's the largest employer in town by quite a bit. Certainly drives the economy in a different fashion. So I think the school district's going to have an impact on the community, hopefully for the better.
Great answer. Very interesting. Because I'm a teacher, I work in it. Here's another one I ask guests. 3 people from history that you'd like to have dinner with, if you could bring them back.
Wow. Well, probably Abraham Lincoln be first. Trying to think of going back a lot further. Somebody maybe not a crazy choice to people would think of would be Dwight Eisenhower. He had a very interesting political and military career, and he probably was the last that I know of, true, based on what I know about, the true gentleman politicians that, sort of, again, was committed to try to do the right thing. And who would number 3 be? Probably somebody like Golda Meir because she kind of broke that glass ceiling, and then literally had to fight a war to keep Israel alive. And she was. I just watched a movie on her, and she pretty much chain smoked herself into an early grave.
Anything I didn't ask that maybe you were expecting me to, or I didn't follow up on?
I don't know really, because there's some questions I'm still trying to answer. The fact that my grandfather and my father went into this partnership in the milk business by buying somebody else's dairy. Now, did they originally bottle the milk there, or when did they bottle? Because I don't have any, the questions you didn't ask your parents when you should have.
Right.
Is when did some of these pieces come together? Because while my father was going to college and when he first was in industry, my grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
with obviously some help from my father, ran the business.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when my father left Bausch and Lomb, he ran the business.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's pieces in there I don't, completely understand. I mean, I know that like during the Depression, because they were sort of a well-balanced agricultural unit, that they were able to hire a lot of people. I shouldn't say a lot, but they were able to hire people that had no place to go.
Mm-hmm.
And, and part of their pay was my grandmother fed them lunch as their main was, it really was dinner.
Mm-hmm.
It was their, main meal.
Mm-hmm.
So, they didn't have really any money. My father had to borrow money to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that they ever went hungry,
Mm-hmm.
which not everybody could say during the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to help out people.
Mm-hmm.
And, unfortunately, I don't know enough about, other than my grandfather, I don't know a lot about the Smith side of the family, other than they were sort of on the Parma Hamlin border farming. I don't know an awful lot about that. In fact, I was surprised to find out maybe less than 10 years ago that my great-great-grandfather built this house over in the corner of Curtis and Town Line Road. I just saw this old house. It's been refurbished by the people that live there now. It looks brand new. That's kind of it.
Well, I've enjoyed listening to you. I think a couple things struck me about being servants of the land. And I think just what you were finishing up with was saying, I wish I knew a little bit more. It inspires me to maybe ask the questions now of my ancestors and descendants. So I've got something to pass along to my kids.
If you have living relatives that are 1 or 2 generations, ask questions, because I didn't ask enough. Okay, thank you.
Well, this has been Mike Heise, your host, with Jim Smith, and we'll be back with more episodes of the Big H Podcast real soon. Stay tuned.